Hey, howdy, hey folks, it is Mrs. Johnson, the Agri-Wisdom channel. I hope this scene looks familiar to some of you by now. We are doing FFA lullabies, so my future farmers can get to sleep. And if they're not sleeping, hopefully learning something with me. And I'm all set up and all cozy and ready to go. And I hope some of you are too. So, let's see. We are reading Cattle Country of Peter French by Giles French. I'm so happy I updated my camera. I will have to re-record some of these now that you can actually see things. We love it. We left off talking about how Peter, Giles, and Dr. Glenn, who is never called Doctor, acquired the land, and what kind of cattle they brought up, and how renowned their cattle was in the region. But if you want to learn more, that's what my last video is for. So, you know. Anyway, we're talking this week on page 66 about the Paiute-Bannock Revolt. Let's jump in. During the Civil War, the blue-clad Union soldiers who guarded the West were recalled to fight the Southerners, and the job of defending their frontiers was left to local troops. Oregon was then a very young state, with a small population, little money, and not much interest in fighting Indians. A small cadre of men had been left at Fort Vancouver. Some troops had been sent up from California, and a few companies had been organized by the state government. But no one knew who was in charge. The result was confusion. Recruited local soldiers signed up for short enlistment periods of only 90 days, then left to mine gold in eastern Oregon or Idaho, which was more exciting and occasionally more profitable than chasing Indians. The Paiute and Bannock tribes consequently did just about as they pleased during the Civil War years. They raided settlements, stole stock, especially horses, burned cabins, attacked pack or wagon trains, and killed a number of white miners and settlers. After the war, the government dispatched General George Crook to Boise to stop this marauding. Crook had served his military apprenticeship in the West before the war. He liked Indians, had learned to talk some of their language, and understood their dissatisfaction with the government, which stemmed largely from insufficient food deliveries to the reservations, the restrictions of reservation life, and the insistence that the braves learn to farm. Crook had been in Boise no more than a month before he started his foray against the natives. He preferred to fight Indians in the winter when, if they could be dislodged from their quarters and their food supply destroyed, they were easily defeated. Indians never had much in the way of reserve supplies. By 1868, Crook had the Paiutes and the Bannocks on reservations, leaving the country open to California stockmen who wanted to move into southern Oregon. Thanks to General Crook, Indians had been no problem to settlers in the Blitzen Valley or the Steens Mountain country. The Paiutes were on the southeastern Oregon Mulhare River Reservation, established in 1872, a parcel of bottom land laying in what is now Mulhare and Harney counties, along the North Fork of the Mulhare River and the Warm Springs Lake. As the reservation contained but a few acres of tillable land, and the Indians had neither skill nor desire to farm, they were fed by the government, though issues of rations were not regular nor always ample. Dependence of the Indians on the government robbed them of self-respect. Furthermore, they held in little esteem. Furthermore, they were held in little esteem by the whites. The Indians were not entirely without encouragement. In 1877, Chief Joseph, over in the Wallowas, I'm so sorry for mispronouncing things, rebelled after the United States permitted white men to invade the country that had been set aside for the Nez Perce by what the chief considered a binding treaty. Young men of the tribe insisted on revolt, and they crossed the Snake River into Idaho to start one of the longest and most successful retreats in history of Indian warfare, though it ended with a defeat of the Nez Perce warriors at Big Hole, close to the northern border of Montana. The Sioux victory over General George A. Custer in 1876 on the Little Bighorn also gave hope to the Western Indians. How much communication existed among various tribes on the reservations is still unknown. Some historians believe that the Nez Perce, Paiutes, Binnocks, and Yakimas together planned a general uprising to drive the white men out. Bill Hanley was among those convinced that the uprising of 1878 was to be a war for the Indian liberation, with Sitting Bull the major plotter. The white defenders apparently thought so too, for they had prepared to halt the Indians of southeastern Oregon at the Columbia River, thus prevent them from joining the Yakimas. The Bannock and Paiute War began shortly after Buffalo Horn. Bannock and Paiute War began shortly after Buffalo Horn, chief of the Bannocks, went to Governor Mason Bryman in Boise to request more guns and ammunition for killing game, complaining that the government did not supply enough beef. Buffalo Horn had been of some service, or felt he had, in the pursuit of Chief Joseph, and Bryman may have considered his plea worthy on that account. In any event, the governor issued the requested supplies. Buffalo Horn then raided Payne's Ferry on the Snake River, where his men killed a white man and a woman. From there, he attacked other white men's camps before going on into Oregon to join the Paiutes on the Mulhare River Reservation. Paiutes were led by Igahente. There we go. A member of the Cayuse tribe, who had become chief through marriage. White men living in the area were unaware of this joining of forces, as were the military men at Fort Harney. A detachment of troops that had started to Boise under Colonel Reuben F. Bernard was hastily recalled to warn settlers that the tribes had consolidated and that they were to come to the fort for safety. Most of them did, but Peter French did not. He went right about his business, either not warned or unwilling to stop his work. A band of Paiutes riding along the east side of the scenes drove Green Crowley and his son, James, from their home. The Crowleys managed to reach the White Horse Ranch in the protection of its stone buildings. The frustrated Indians returned to the Crowley cabin and burned it, as well as the buildings on the Anderson Ranch. Among the settlers who reported to Fort Harney were George Smith and his family, including a married son, John, and a son-in-law, Stiley Riddle. Restless about their stock and untended homes, George Smith and his son rode the 50 miles to their homes in Happy Valley a few days later. There they found everything in good order. The stock was doing well and their homes was undisturbed. They decided to return to the fort the next day. About daybreak, they heard a noise outside. Peering from a window upstairs, they saw an Indian Peering from an upstairs window, they saw about 50 Indians in the yard, carrying brush and wood towards the house, with the apparent intent of setting it afire. Smiths fired upon the Indians, who retreated to safe positions from which they returned fire. Soon the warriors could be heard on the side of the house that had no windows, and they set afire. The Smiths remained indoors, shooting whenever they could see an Indian. But shortly they were so choked out by smoke and blistered by the heat that they had to open the front door to try and escape. The Indians were prepared. They shot at the white men who fell back into the house where they were burned to death. The Indians destroyed other houses in Happy Valley later that same day. Peter French, with a crew of 16 men, was at the Diamond Ranch the day of July 14, 1878, preparing to brand some calves. A new settler from Willamette Valley, Sylvester Coon Smith, had come over to the Diamond from Happy Valley, 8 to 10 miles to the northeast, to borrow the running gears of a wagon. He intended to haul some poles to build corrals. He stayed overnight at the ranch and early next morning headed home with his equipment. On approaching the rim at the top of the grade, where French had fenced the valley with stone walls between the rim rock, Coon Smith saw a party of 20 to 25 Indians beyond the big gate. Hastily cutting his tugs, he mounted his fastest horses and raced back to the Diamond Ranch. The Indians had some difficulty with the big wooden gate, which was fastened shut by a long rod pushed into a hole in a cliff. Never before had they seen such a contrivance. It took them several minutes to open the gate and take up the chase. By that time, Smith had sufficient lead to beat them to the ranch buildings. He rode in, shouting, "Indians, Indians!" The cowmen were just getting saddled up for the day's work. French immediately ordered, "Saddle up as quick as God will let you, and don't forget to catch a horse for the Chinamen. I'll hold them back a while." John Smith was sent to the meadow to warn John Ochoko. Again, I'm really sorry if I'm mispronouncing these. Witzel, an 18-year-old lad from Ochoko Valley, who was holding the horse brand a short distance away. French then took the only rifle in camp and crawled onto a gate where he could get behind a big juniper gatepost for protection. From there, he opened fire on the red invaders. He stopped them for only a few minutes. Before long, the Indians climbed the rocky hill to get a better shot at him. Meanwhile, riding as hard as they could, the crew turned at the bend of the hill, following McCoy Creek, on the way to the P Ranch. The Chinaman had never ridden a horse and fell off before he had gone far. He was hiding under a bridge when the Indians killed him. Coon Smith's horse was already tired, causing him to fall behind the fleeing vaqueros. But he saved his life by catching the horse the cook had lost. French jumped down from the gatepost to make his escape, and the Indians were right behind him. He followed his crew up the east side of the McCoy River to the trail crossing. At a break in the rim rock, French took his horse out of range, crawled behind a rock, and proceeded to fire the remainder of his bullets at the Indians. He killed some of them and managed to hold all of them back until his men were well on their way. The only casualty in his crew, except the Chinaman, was the young Ochoko Witzel, who was shot in the thigh by a bullet that killed his horse. Later that day, the pilots killed Tom Dixon and a man named Harrison, who were fishing in the Blitzen River. The little party of white men stopped at the P Ranch to consider the best course of action. Deciding that they lacked both men and ammunition enough to repel a large body of Indians, they headed towards Fort Harney, but not down the Blitzen, which they feared might be full of hostile Indians. Instead, they rode to the west of Jackass Mountains. In some very rough country, crossing the sand reef near Harney Lake. The men reached the fort the next day. It was a long, hard trip for the wounded John Witzel, riding with a bullet wound in his hip. French never did find out how many Indians he killed that day, but nothing he had done since coming to the Blitzen Valley so enhanced his reputation for bravery. At Fort Harney, he joined the soldiers under Colonel Bernard, who was glad to get the support of so determined a man. French was made a scout and ordered to lead the civilian volunteers under the orders of Orlando Rube Robbins, chief of a scouting detachment that had joined the men stationed at the fort. Many settlers also served with the soldiers. After raiding the Blitzen Valley, where they burned the buildings and drove off horses. The band burned buildings and drove off horses. The band of Indians that had attacked the Diamond Ranch and killed the Smiths made their way leisurely to a camp on Silver Creek. There they set up their teepees on a willow-covered rocky flat where there was fuel to cook the white man's beef. There they were joined by the main body of Indians under Buffalo Horn and Egan. And there the scouts found them a week after their depredations in the Blitzen Valley. The report to Bernard was that there were more than 1,000 Indians in the camp, including several hundred warriors. Colonel Bernard had 4 companies of cavalry, about 160 men, yet despite the difference in numbers, he decided to attack. On the night of June 22nd, he moved his soldiers to a camp a few miles from Silver Creek. In the early light of Sunday, June 23rd, Peter French and the civilian volunteers under Scout Robbins crept towards the camp from a short distance up the creek. Colonel Bernard with his cavalry was below. At dawn, they both struck, riding through the willows, upsetting teepees, and shooting and shouting to stampede the horses. It was a surprise attack. As each group of attackers reached the end of the camp, the men wheeled about and returned. Soon the Red Warriors fled to the bluffs, caught horses, and began a counterattack. Rube Robbins and Chief Egan engaged in a duel in which Egan received a wrist wound and Robin had his horse shot from under him. Peter French quickly rode to Robbins, helped him mount behind his own saddle, and escaped from the battle. Buffalo Horn was killed, along with nearly 50 of his braves. The troops lost 4 men. Both sides claimed victory, but the losses of the Indians were much greater. After the battle, they fled north up Silver Creek towards the Blue Mountains. Crossing the John Day River below Canyon City, they worked on towards Pendleton and Hepner, where residents threw makeshift forts for protection, certain that the Indians were on their way to join the Yakimas. All available riverboats were commandeered to patrol the Columbia River to prevent the Indians from crossing it, should they attempt to. The Indian attack faded. Near Ukiah, the Paiutes and Bunuks met some Otomatias, who betrayed Egan and killed him, delivering his head to an army officer in a sack. Without leadership, the red men, hungry, beaten, and discouraged, started back to their reservations. Soon the federal government moved them to other reservations in distant states, breaking up the tribes in the process. The agency at Malheur Indian Reservation was abandoned and sold. That is the last of this chapter. I hope we learned something. And I hope that we get to bed soon. So, without further ado, if you have comments, questions, concerns, drop them in the comments below. And what else? Oh, I hope you had a lovely day. And I hope tomorrow is a lovely day. And you are a lovely person. Don't forget to drink some water, get some snacks, get some food, and get some sleep. Because we're doing FFA lullabies. So that insinuates that we should be going to bed soon. So, bye. Have a good day.